realize these are not so minute, they are so all pervasive, so pervasive. So that is another interesting talk we had was Dr. Jayaraman. He is heading, he's the director of the research in Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandir. Okay. And very useful for the scholars, like the talk of Professor Sakrikar as well. One word, and particularly if it's a very important word, like Prayatna Shathilya or Chitta Prasad. These are defined, explained by different contemporary scholars in English terms. But if we look at the tikas or interpretations, bhashyas, we may come across much better and integral meaning of those words. So
yeah, we'll discuss it. It's 7 o'clock.
Yeah. So, for example, one word, he gave one example of Pratna Shathilya. Okay, this just with one example, I am really tempted to share that Prayatna Shathilya, how it is defined in 15 different bhashyas. That can give a comprehensive understanding. Those meanings are not contradictory to each other, but enriching in a way. And that is different from the simple, typical English translation.
Right.
So very amazing, these kind of deliberations, really cherished it. I hope that we will be able to document most of these things and come up with the audited volume.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashish ji.
So, namaste to all of you who have joined, and I'm sure many of you will be joining, many of the participants will be joining as we proceed. We are going to begin the session. Really thankful to Dr. Subhash Kak for joining in very early in the morning as per his time where he's residing, that is in the Ohio state in USA. And I'll request Shashi. Shashi is a core team member of the Yogast Club. Yogast Club, Professor Kak was started in 2015 in IIT. This was started as a student club. Some of us were there as a faculty mentor, but we were just mentor. Means all the activities were carried out by the students. Mostly they conduct practice sessions, and so around the World Yoga Day, of course, they organize a lot of events. But throughout the year, they conduct practice sessions and classes. Different yoga masters are being called upon to teach the practices to students, faculty members, and the campus residents. In last 5 years, this has grown really well, very well, and we are really proud of our student team, the way they have taken forward these a lot of activities and which go on throughout the year. So Shashi is the core member of that group. And I'll request Shashi to introduce Professor Kak formally and take forward this program.
Thank you, sir. Very good evening, everyone. Namaskaram. It's a great pleasure and privilege for me to introduce our guest, Dr. Subhash Kak, for the valedictory session. So, sir, Subhash Kak is a Regent Professor in Electrical and Computer Engineering Department at Oklahoma State University in Stillwater. Sir is an accomplished and world-renowned researcher in the field of cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, archaeoastronomy, and history of science. His current research is in the field of theory of neural network and quantum information. There is a member of Indian Prime Minister's Science, Technology and Innovation Advisory Council since 2018 and also awarded the Indian Civilian Award Padma Shri in 2019. There is a author of 20 plus books, mainly includes The Mind and Self, The Ashwamedha, The Wishing Tree, and many more. In the book, The Nature of Physical Reality and Mind and Self and other publications, he argues that there are limits to the extent the world is computable. The books like The God Within, The Gods Within, The Architecture of Knowledge, and the Prajna Sutra explains his philosophy of recursionism. The name of his autobiography is The Circle of Memory. With the thanks, I request you all to give attention to Dr. Subhash talk to welcome him for the session.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shashi ji and Ashish ji and Yogastha Club for having invited me to speak at your very interesting conference. What I've been told about what has already transpired, it includes a lot on practices, on various perspectives, on things such as Ayurveda and all that. So what I would do is perhaps, since I did not actually sit on what has already transpired, I would focus on a more academic perspective, not just academic related to just the Yoga Darshan, but a larger perspective from science, and perhaps that is only apt since Yogastha Club is located at Indian Institute of Technology, Mumbai. So do that, and hopefully by the end of my talk, then we would have some questions that I would be able to amplify some of these points in my answers. Okay, so in my view, where we stand, both in science, in the physical sciences, medical sciences, as well as larger questions of society, the matter of yoga is paramount, and I'll explain why it is. And here we are speaking of yoga from the point of view that it brings in the observer. You know, you can speak of reality as a collection of objects, and we are all objects, but we are also of these objects. So this is this dichotomy of physical reality and consciousness that that has been of a conversation, certainly in quantum mechanics, for 100 years, and is also increasingly the discussion in health sciences, in medical sciences, because you have the matter of the body and the mind. And we do know now that the mind exercises an influence on the body, and therefore to look at the body by itself, as allopathy does, as Western medicine does, is extremely limiting. And what we need to do is to bring in the mind also into the picture, which is what Ayurveda does. And therefore, you already had a session on that. This is another important aspect where we need to come together, where we need to bring in both these insights to see how does medical science proceed in a more rational way. And then in society, if people feel that they are nothing but bodies, as of course media and colleges and university education tells people increasingly and more emphatically, and if this is what people believe as good students, you would like to believe all that you're being. If you're told that you're nothing but your body, perhaps that is to be the explanation for why there is this much of despair amongst people. And in a society like America's, which is of course unprecedentedly wealthy. You still have, a couple of years ago, the statistics was about 70,000 people had died of opioid overdose. And these were, many of them, most of them were young people with families, with good careers, because they feel that how they are living their life is pointless. Because if they're nothing but their bodies, and the bodies, of course, are going to wither away with time, then what is it that we are? And that is the fundamental question. And I think that's what yoga addresses. And that's why, in my view, yoga is truly central. Now, we do know that yoga is one of the 6 darshanas associated with the Vedic system. And these darshanas come in 3 complementary pairs. You have the Purva Mimamsa and Uttar Mimamsa, which is Vedanta, as a pair. And here, what we discuss are questions related to logic associated with one's practices, which is in Purva Mimamsa, and logic related to the entire question of what reality is, which is Vedanta. Then you have Nyaya and Vaisheshika. Nyaya is logic related to discussions of what things are, and Vaisheshika is taking atomic structure and then make sense of what physical reality is. But Vaisheshika, in contrast to modern physics, or physics in general, the Western tradition of physics, does bring in the observer right in the beginning. In Vaisheshika, you have 3 categories associated with outer reality, and these are Dravya, Guna, and Karma, which is substance, attributes, and their motion. Define all that there is to physical reality, which is wonderful, which is quite consistent with physics, modern physics. But then you also have 3 other categories associated with the observation process or relationship with this physical reality. And these are Samanya, which is universal, Vishesha, which is particular, from where Vaisheshika comes in, particular related to the way we experience reality. And then you have Samavaya, which is where an interaction occurs between outer reality and the individual. So in contrast to physics, as it called in the Western tradition, it does bring in the observer very directly into the picture. Now, very sadly, Indian textbooks do not present all of this, and they do not also present, in contrast to what is in fact totally wrong. I was leafing through a PDF copy of the 9th class book on physics, where in the chapter, this is NCERT, where the chapter on atoms, there is this remark right in the beginning that Kanada, in his Vaisheshika Sutras, defined an atom, because when you keep on dividing matter, you will eventually end up at the smallest sized atom, and that's what it was. And of course, this is not true at all. In fact, the writer of this NCERT book, or this committee, they just made it up, because no one amongst them clearly had seen Vaisheshika Sutras of Kanada. What Kanada says is that you have 4 different fundamental anus or atoms, and these are related to the 4 bhutas of Prithvi, Apaha, Tejas, and Vayu, and they are all different. And of these 4, 2 have mass. Prithvi and Apaha, and two do not, which is Tejas and Vayu, and which is quite consistent with what modern physics tells us, that you have four kinds of atoms: proton, electron, photon, and neutrino, and two of them do not have mass and two do. And what Vaisheshika's traditions tells us, that every material consists of all these four atoms. It's not that that gold, for example, it has all these four. When you heat it, so normally you only see the Prithvi part of it, which is gross matter. When you heat it, it becomes liquid because of Apaha. You heat it further, it burns and becomes bright and shines. So that's when the Tejas atoms shine through or come out, because you're breaking it up. And as it decays, that's when the Vayu atoms, the Vayu Anu, leave this object. So therefore, and this is a very, very interesting and logical thing, which obviously Rishi Kanada came to this insight by reflection, by vimarsha, by analysis of reality as he could see it. But he also, in the other three categories, spoke of samavaya, and which is the interaction between consciousness and between the observer and reality. Now, this is extremely important, also since I'm speaking at IIT Mumbai, also because we all know that physics is facing a huge crisis. All of physics, when it comes to cosmological scales, is based only on 0.5% of the observable universe. 95%, because physical theories, gravitation, etc., Newton's or Einstein's are not able to explain the speeds at which these galaxies are moving about, or the very fact that the universe is accelerating outwards, and therefore 95% of the physical universe is supposed to be dark matter and dark energy, of which we have no evidence right now. And the other 4.5% is supposed to be interstellar gases. So all that we are left with is 0.5%. And clearly that could not be the true picture. And in my own view is that what we might be, just as 100 years ago, there was a crisis in physics, which was resolved only when the atomic structure of matter was discovered and when quantum theory emerged. Likewise, we are sitting at a huge crisis right now, and perhaps the resolution of it will emerge when the observer is taken or brought into the picture in a much more radical way than was done by either relativity theory or by quantum mechanics. So this is another reason why this needs to come in, because after all, Vaisheshika is a complementary and view to yoga, because I was talking of these three. So we already spoke about the two Mimamsas, then Nyaya and Vaisheshika, and then of course you have Sankhya and Yoga. Sankhya is enumeration of different categories of reality, which include both the outer, the Tanamatras and the Bhutas and so on, and also the inner, which is where yoga comes in. So yoga is where all of these merging, joining takes place, and having through other disciplines in the modern sciences, and these disciplines of course include all the the chemistry and the physics and biology and so on, which is all enumeration of categories at different levels. So we've reached a point where we do need to bring it all together, and yoga can do it. And so yoga is so much more fundamental then the common understanding related to physical well-being, the asanas and all that. And of course, we do have these two great classics of yoga, the Yoga Sutra, where yoga is defined as Chitta Vritti Nirodha. And the vrittis are, of course, thoughts. So you calm these thoughts so as to find out what reality is, because what the thoughts do is to give structure to your experience of reality, which is, if you do have a background in quantum mechanics, you have physical reality, then you interact with it. And so what we observe is a consequence of our interaction with the physical reality, with reality as it is. So thoughts are a consequence of our interaction with this reality, but we want to go beyond the thoughts, because the thoughts are constructed reality, and we want to see what true reality is beyond the thoughts. So this is totally consistent with the picture of quantum mechanics, but it really gives us a means of going beyond where quantum mechanics, because of its starting point of very, very limited focus of just looking at reality. So we want to go much more beyond it and look at mind, look at physical reality related to the self itself, and that's why yoga includes the whole larger subject of yoga, includes the outer categories. Here we can bring in Vaisheshika as well, or the physical system, but then allows one to turn one's gaze on the individual himself, and because there one could ask, shouldn't the body itself be taken as an outer reality? If the body itself is an outer reality, then who is the experiencer? So we're really asking questions which go much further and beyond where Western science, or let's call it contemporary science, because Western science, as we all know, has also been created by people from India. And let's look at two of different kinds of particles. Well, they're called fermions and bosons. And boson is after S.N. Bose. Really, what we know of what we call reality, modern science, has a very important Indian component as well. But what we are doing here is, of course, to step back and ask the deepest questions. And these deepest questions were discussed in the Shastras, were discussed by the Rishis in the Darshanas, and the various commentaries, the Bhashyas, and the various practices that emerged. Because with yoga, you also have Tantra, for example, and Tantra is an exploration of the very nature of one's mind and self. So all of these things come together, and yoga is therefore of such amazing scope with promise for students, such as students and faculty, such as the IITs, and all over the world, where, as I just mentioned, we are confronting the greatest crises in science, the great crisis of physics, the 95% dark matter and dark energy, and the great crisis of modern medicine. I don't know whether you are aware of it. About 70 to 90% of all biomedical research which gets published in the best journals of the world is not repeatable. In other words, in recent years, and there have been many papers on it, and in fact, I've written a popular blog. You might want to see it on medium.com with citations. It's called the reproducibility crisis of modern medicine. So 70 to 90% of research papers, other researchers are unable to reproduce. And why does that happen? Because of a variety of factors, because of pharma, because of bias, because the researchers are they have a hypothesis, so they focus only on such observations which seem to support their hypothesis, or the experiments are not very well designed, or you are leaving out the subject, the self, the mind. And we also do know that there is something called the placebo effect. If the patient is told that he's being given a medication, and what you really give the patient is just, let's say, sugar pill or something which is totally harmless, the patient, 34% thereabouts, will still get well. And in fact, there's also something called the nocebo effect. If you give the patient a sugar pill, but you tell the patient that the patient is being given a certain medication, then the patient, or 30% of the patient, will also develop the side effects associated with this patient, which the patient knows of. So in other words, the mind plays all kinds of tricks with the body, which modern medicine, allopathy, does not accept, because there's no for mind in allopathic medicine, and therefore it's missing out on lots of things associated with well-being, and which is why you have all these chronic illnesses related to hypertension and many others, diabetes and many others, or arthritis, which modern medicine is not able to deal with. And you have this situation right now that a lot of people, older people, or maybe even in their 40s and 50s, are taking or popping 10, 15, 20, 30 pills every day. And we don't know what kind of side effects are associated with these pills, because all of these medications do have side effects. And therefore, we truly face a huge crisis associated with medicine. We have a crisis associated with the understanding of physical reality, with medicine, with the way society is structured, with the way even education is imparted. Because look at education, what we are doing in all universities is just provide a lot of information to the students without an ability to pick what is relevant from what is not relevant. And all these details are, of course, forgotten, perhaps rightly so, after these exams are over. And people do not necessarily get any insights to properly navigate their way through all the challenges of life. In fact, people have also said that 95% of all jobs that there are in modern economies require no knowledge beyond the Excel spreadsheet, which of course people should be taught in their high school itself, right? And the other skills related to doing things properly, or writing texts or communicating with others. If that is the case, what are colleges doing? This is another challenge. And we see a manifestation of this challenge in America right now, where all these young people, college graduates, are going around. They want to destroy the whole country because of a variety of reasons. They feel that, first of all, at the end of this pervasive automation that is taking place, AI-led permanent disappearance of jobs, the question of what the meaning of, where is one supposed to fit in at the end of college education. So you want to just pull the whole system down. And there will probably not be that many jobs, or maybe the whole economy needs to be restructured. And I think all the insights that we need for this major change in the West, which is truly facing a crisis, and in countries like China also, where there is this simplistic understanding of domination, which is of course ridiculous because the whole world is a family. You just don't want to grow and occupy this land or that land and fighting with all these things. That is very simplistic. So uh, how do we expand the human consciousness, not only at the individual level, but also at the societal level, at the political level, with insights from yoga, because yoga is where the outer and the inner meet. Uh, we talked about Chitta Vritti Nirodha at the personal level, but yoga, the other great classic of yoga is, of course, the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, Yoga Karmasu Kaushala, which tells us, right, that's what we need. Um, both in relation to other individuals, as we need to do in personal lives, in relation, in societal relations, in relationships between nations. How do we do it skillfully? That is Kaushalam. And also how to, by turning the gaze inwards at the personal level and also at the societal level. A lot of modern disciplines that have emerged have certainly provided insights which complement this, and where one of the drivers was the yogic or the Vedic tradition. For example, Ashish ji was talking about anthropology and all of that. And as we know, the whole subject of anthropology was developed, or the beginnings of it are traced to de Saussure in France about 100 years ago. And the motivating intellectual framework was the work of Panini, which when Westerners discovered that Panini had done this amazing thing of describing a whole language in terms of 4,000 algebraic rules. And language is one of the most fundamental of human expressions. Now, societal relationships are another language. So they said, well, if we can have rules for vocal expressions, we should also be able to determine the rules for social expressions, which is how anthropology comes in. So, and then, of course, as we all know, these are all complementary disciplines. You had Bharata Muni's Natya Shastra, this great book where Bharata Muni not only described gesture and acting in a intellectual discipline, but also music. And so it was music and of course, the way you communicate on theater. So all of this is also subject to sciences. So what we normally see as Western modern social sciences have an Indian genesis, which people in India, sadly, in my view, are not aware of. And I think it's good to be aware of it and also enrich it, because all of these disciplines have also gotten stuck in grooves, and you need to sort of re-energize them, but going back to the original texts, by going back to the insights of the rishis, because the insights of the rishis are valuable because they are connected still to the infinite, to the Atman. The Western disciplines, although they took inspiration from here, became finite, limited structures. And you do need to keep on going back to the source to enrich it, which is how, which is how in psychology itself, in fact, people that who these are leading psychologists that look, psychology is in a crisis because in psychology there's no place for the self. You're only talking of stimulus response, that here is the stimulus of this individual, and you have fMRI, functional MRI, you're looking at where the brain is lighting up, but it doesn't provide you any insight as to who the self is or why something is happening. And therefore, you do need to bring in the self again and again. Self, the drashta, the seer, the self is where the next advance in science will take place, and people are aware that that's what needs to be done. That's why there's an attempt being made by researchers from so many different fields to create what would be consciousness science. We cannot at this point say that modern consciousness science exists. All that we can say is that we are trying, people from different disciplines are trying to see how it could be created. I was part of a small group which was put together in the with some membership from Europe as well. And this group consisted of physicists, neuroscientists, doctors, philosophers, and computer scientists, and some policymakers in America, 20, 30 people. And the whole question was, will computers of the future become conscious? Not necessarily 5 years from now or 10 years from now, even let's say 100 or 500 years from now. And we had many meetings, and this whole question of consciousness is truly fundamental from a computer science perspective as well, because if computers become conscious like us, and they will then realize that, hey, here is these other conscious creatures who are this huge trouble, so let's just get rid of them, right? They won't have any need for us. So clearly the whole world will change. Now, many meetings and these were week-long workshops from morning to night. We had many meetings in the US and also one meeting in Cambridge in UK. And so there were many different perspectives. And I can tell you that there was a kind of a split. 50% of the people, and these were some of the world's leading scientists, believed that computers will become conscious. And their argument was that computers will be able to embody more and more of what happens in the brain. And once they are able to emulate it, once they are able to emulate process beyond a certain degree of complexity, then these machines will become conscious. Now, I was not one of those 50%. The other 50% who were inspired, who were connected to Vedanta. In fact, I can tell you that these were all Western scholars. I was the only Indian. And there was this 50-50 split. 50% of them, even though they're all Westerners, intellectually thought that the only thing that made sense was shunyata of Buddhism. So they were connected in their personal lives, although they didn't make any big deal of it, to the Buddhist tradition of shunyata, that there is nothing, stuff of reality is nothing, and out of that emerges everything, including minds. And the other 50% were connected to Vedanta. And as those many of you might know, that the creator of quantum mechanics himself, the Austrian physicist Erwin Schrödinger, was a Vedantin. He used to always carry an Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita with him wherever he went. And according to scholars, Vedanta and quantum mechanics are totally consistent with each other. So these other 50% who knew more of quantum mechanics, etc., a lot of biologists or psychologists are mechanistic. They think that bodies or the minds like machines, and therefore for them to be attracted to the shunyata concept is understandable, but those who do physics are much more in tune with the whole framework that we have of the darshanas that we have from India, the Vedanta, and so there the observer is always a part. In quantum mechanics, the observer in the orthodox Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics is always apart from physical reality. In fact, even in Newtonian mechanics, the observer is apart from the physical reality that's being described. And so consciousness then, as in yoga, where the self is apart, so the whole physical body, the brain, all the processes are apart, which in the Rig Veda is described through this image of the tree which two birds sit. One of them is eating the fruit and the other just watches. And this is the image in Kathopanishad or in the Bhagavad Gita of the body as a chariot where the senses are the horses, the buddhi is the reins, the mind is the driver, and the sakshi, the observer, is consciousness, which is just one, and that is Krishna, if you image from the context of the Bhagavad Gita, as the self, as the universal self, or if you are connected to the Shaivite tradition, then Shiva is the name of consciousness within each one of us, or Ishvara, who's the real ruler and enjoyer, is Shiva within us. Or you can also approach it from the perspective of the physical self itself, which is then a Prakriti. And Prakriti and consciousness, Prakriti and Shiva, are dual aspects of the same reality. So they are like the coin. On one side, you have Prakriti, or the goddess. On the other side, you have Shiva. So Shiva and Uma, Shiva and Parvati, or the god and the goddess, whichever lens you want to look at reality from, are dual aspects of the same reality. And so then this is this recognition at the personal level of these two sides of us, of the fact that we normally, the way that's the part of the growth of the individual, we see ourselves only as our mind, and these minds are associations with the outer, and therefore we are not in touch with our true self within. And that true self, amazingly, of course, is the same for all of us. And this is these are images shown in Vedanta, for example. You have one outer sun, and the same outer sun can shine in a million different pots of water, right? You'll see disk. So, and in fact, this is an image even Schrödinger used in one of his most famous book called What is Life, which was very inspirational to Crick, Francis Crick. Francis Crick changed his career from physics to biology after reading What is Life. And as you know, Francis Crick was the discoverer of the DNA, the structure DNA. So there is, all these threads coming together. And it's amazing that all these threads go back to this Vedic tradition, to these rishis, which looked at all these problems from so many different perspectives and gave, in the Shastras, gave both an analytical framework for one to just sit back and make sense of what the outer is, and then turn that gaze onto oneself and through yoga transform oneself. In fact, yoga, therefore, is this technology of self-transformation to see the god or the goddess within each one of us. It's the most liberating thing that there is. And the physical asanas are just uh, a preparation of that sense of well-being, which then can be used to go further and explore the very framework of the ways of seeing. And once one does that, all kinds of capacities become available to us, because if each one of us, each human being, each sentient being has the same self within, then each sentient being, if only they were to find that self, find that Shiva or Krishna or the goddess within them, be one with that, with the gods within them, will have all the capacities that everybody else has. You know, this is this most liberating and inspirational of ideas that there can be. And I can, of course, speak on this for hours and give you examples which will convince you that indeed it's not just storytelling. We are not saying this just because it sounds good to believe in this, but this is what truth is. This is what education should be about. And one of the challenges for places like the IITs and every other university and college, and for us also as parents and brothers and sisters, is how do we inspire everybody around us to be connected to this great power that is within each one of us. And if we did that, then won't life be so much more wonderful? Because then we'll see that connectivity within each one of us, and rather than have a world which is based on domination and control, which can occur both at the individual level, but also at national level, as we sadly saw recently, a month ago, in that border skirmish. So how do we then create a world society which gives place to everybody to find their true self? So I'll just stop here, and any questions that you might have, we'll have some time to deal with them also. I can't. Your speaker.
Professor Neeraj Kumbhakaran is here. He is a professor in the mechanical engineering in IIT Bombay.
Okay.
And he is the one who understands engineering, and he is ardent practitioner of yoga. So he will take forward this conversation. Yes.
Namaste, Professor Kar. So I'm currently the mentor of the Yogastha Club here. I'm faculty in mechanical engineering. So thank you for the enlightening talk. What I wanted to ask is, you said that we have understood some 5% of the universe and 95% is still not understood. But will the remaining 95% be understood by using the same methods that were used to understand the 5%? Because if we keep going with this dichotomy of, this is yoga and this is modern science, this is ancient and this is modern, will we be able to get there? Because do you think it's time for us to go with an integrated approach, a blended approach, and not have this hard division between, say, yoga and modern science?
Well, very good question, Neeraj. I'm glad that you are the mentor to Yogastha Club. Excellent question. And the answer to that is that in many ways, aspects of yoga or consciousness, if you will, the observer, right? As in Vaisheshika yoga, you have the observer and the body, have already been introduced into physics and the physics revolution of the 20th century. You look at relativity theory, the question of the observer. You look at, and as you know, if you've read the Bhagavad Puran, you know that all these ideas are a part of the Puranas also. Motion at different rates, time at different rates, etc. Conceptually, we're not saying that physics existed, this physics existed, but conceptually all these ideas are here. So, the relativity revolution, the quantum mechanics revolution, which I've already mentioned, was just by Schrödinger. He claims in his autobiography that the Upanishadic Mahavakya, I am Atma Brahm, this is from the Atharva Veda tradition, was what gave him this central notion of quantum mechanics, that there should be a superposition of all possibilities within this state. So the Vedic and yogic sciences have already transformed science as we know. It's only that sadly in the West, people are generally aware of it. It's sadly in India, because in India, there is this unfortunate thing that happened in the last 40 or 50 years. Indian elite decided to separate themselves from our own tradition. So we don't know in schools and colleges, first of all, what this incredible, extraordinary tradition is. And secondly, how this tradition has already shaped what we are otherwise taught. It'll be good to know. I'm not saying that we should be obsessed with the past, but it'll be good to know what it is, because the challenges that society is confronted with are also enormous right now. But to come back to your question, Neeraj, yes, indeed. What may be the answer? It's not that there is truly 95% of some dark matter residing there. They are being forced to postulate it because they are totally lost. Maybe what is required is a change of perspective, which is where somehow the observer would come in, and we will then know, this is a word to the physicists out there, we'll know that maybe the way we are posing this problem is the problem. That it's not that 95% is missing. We are conceiving of physical reality of the cosmos in a wrong way, which is why we are being forced to postulate it. Just as in certain traditions, people in their metaphysics is also postulated some jinns, that there are these jinns who do this, right? Because you can't explain various things that are going on. So all these shadows fall away if you look at reality with the utmost clarity. And that's clarity is what yoga is all about. How do we have that clarity, not only in our personal lives, and certainly we should have clarity in personal lives, but also be able to see the world as it is outside in all its various manifestations, in various lokas, you know, the social loka, the political loka, and so on, in with as much of clarity as we can, so that we know which way we should be going.
Yeah, thank you. So I think to add to that, I might say that, I mean, to make further progress, certain amount of training in physics, quantum mechanics, a certain amount of training to use the means and the instruments is required. But along with that, a certain upgradation and evolution of consciousness is also required for the person who is doing that, right?
Absolutely, and that occurs. Yoga is a process when you turn the gaze inwards. You know, there is this amazing tradition which comes from my part of India, namely Kashmir. It's called the Pratyabhigya, which is the doctrine of recognition. That when you turn your gaze and see yourself truly for what you are, then suddenly all the amazing stuff happens. You know, your consciousness itself changes, because you thought that you were only this. And now when you recognize yourself for who we are, you know, that bimba and pratibimba, when you see your image, and that does truly, as you point out, that truly changes. Or let's go back to the yoga categories from Yoga Sutra itself. You have you have to eliminate the mala, the impurity in the lens of your mind. Your mind is a lens, but it has impurities. It also has vikshepa, right? It has turbulence. It also has avaran. It has covering. So as you eliminate the covering, you are arriving at higher levels of consciousness, because a higher level of consciousness, what it really means is that you have more clarity. If you have It's like you're walking in the dark. The sun hasn't come up. It's not, the dawn is yet to really show up. And so you can't see things very clearly. As the light floods the place, then you can see things for what they are. So that is what higher levels of consciousness are. So how do we allow the light to flood in? And my thing would be that, you have there's really nothing in the world as extraordinary as these texts, including the central challenge of modern science, is how do we have freedom? If physical laws govern everything that happens, then we can only be robots, right? We are like machines. Then how do we have freedom? This question was also a part of the Vedic and yogic tradition and discussion in India for centuries. And there was a resolution that came up centuries ago. And that resolution was the so-called Drishti Srishti Vada, that divinity, that Atman, just by Drishti is able to do Srishti, of which we have this analog in quantum mechanics, which my late friend George Sudarshan came up with in the 1970s, which is called the quantum Zeno effect. By observation alone, you can change the state of a system. By observation alone, you can steer the state of a system. And this has all been shown in the lab as well. So what saddens me is that with all this incredible stuff, why don't we do or let people in India, Indian schools and colleges know of all this incredible stuff?
Yeah.
I'm glad Yogastha Club is there doing it, but this should be revolutionizing everything. And if India were to awaken, the whole world will be awakened. This is that time. The whole world, in my view, is waiting for this rebirth to take place.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Kak. That was a great discussion. Thank you.
Yeah. I see Aditya Agrawalji is also wishes to ask a question. Aditya Agrawalji is a PhD scholar. He is IIT Kanpur and IIM Bangalore alumnus, and currently he's pursuing his PhD in our department in the field of yoga and organizational healing and their connection. So his work is on the field work. Yes, Aditya, please go ahead.
Professor Kagi, it is indeed a good fortune to listen to your talk. And I've heard several of your talks in YouTube, but the first time you took out time for the Yoga's conference, so a lot of thanks, sir. My question is about a unique phenomena in our culture, the worship of Devi. And in all ancient traditions, the Devi Sadhana, the worship of Mother Goddess was there. How can we take forward this particular idea in the research field? It intrigues me, this immense Devi Sadhana.
Okay.
So the notion of Gaia is also seems to be, is there a similarity in the notion of Gaia and Devi Sadhana? That
Gaia is the cosmic cow. The same word, go in Sanskrit means cow, right? In Yaska's Nirukta, the meaning of the word go, the first meaning is the earth. Did you know that? The animal is only the second meaning. It also is light and so on, right? So the cow is a symbol of the planet Earth. Okay, so Gaia comes from there. But to come back to your question, Aditya ji, about the Devi, the central notion of the central epistemological ground of the Vedas is this triple division, which is why the Ved jo hai, वो त्रयी विद्या कहते हैं. वेद त्रयी विद्या इसलिए है because there is this triple division of bhu, bhuvaha, swaha, right? Bhu meaning the earth, which is the body. Bhuvaha meaning the atmosphere or antariksh, right? Between here and the sun, or the pranas, that is the bhuva. And swaha or swar means the sun, which is the inner sun or the outer sun. Now, look, we are the individual self who we are observing it through our mind, right? So that is the individual self, which is accessible to us. And then you have the universal self, which you compare to this sun. But in between is where the action is, which is where Prakriti is, which is the Antariksha or the pranas, right? And that is the domain of the Devi, physical reality. Prakriti is all Devi. You can ultimately go to the innermost secrets only through the worship of the goddess, through the Devi. You know, even Shankara, in his Saundarya Lahari, eventually goes through the goddess, which is through reality, physical reality. So, depending upon at what level you are doing this narrative, at the individual level, you can speak of the worship of the Devi, but as scientists, we can also speak of nature itself, study of the nature. And people ask me, what should we do? I say, well, rather than just sit in your room, go out, walk. You know, nature will teach you. Nature will instruct you, because nature is who the goddess is. You see that? So it depends on what your personal take is. If your take is that of bhakti, then you might say that, okay, it's my deity, this particular goddess, right? And Saraswati will come to me, or you know, Lakshmi, or whatever goddess you're talking about. Or if your worship is through Tantra, then you want to explore the total inner landscape, the whole structure of your mind, or as represented, for example, in Sri Vidya, right? You go through the various layers of yourself, and you ultimately go to the very heart of your being, where all these goddesses with all their glory have provide you the grace, the prasad of all those siddhis. But within all of that is, of course, infinitesimal form, Shiva, because the more you look for Shiva, all that you are going to see is the goddess, right? Because you will be spoken through the goddess. And because Shiva is you yourself. You know, this is incredible stuff. We could do it for hours. It's you. So it depends upon where you stand in your journey, which will tell you, you know, what path would be the best for you to sort of expound as an instructor, as a professor. Aditya, I presume you're going to be a professor, so or as an instructor or teacher or mentor. At what level would be the right one for you to connect to others?
Thanks very much, sir. Would you like to share something about the neuroscientific insights, which is the basic matter of your book? It is out of print. I ordered a few weeks ago. Still there are a few weeks left for me to receive it. So that's what Amazon has said. Probably I'll receive it in the first week of August. It looks like it's out of print, and they will be arranging it from somewhere.
Which book are you talking about?
The Patanjali Yoga Sutra, the Mind and Yoga Sutra.
Oh, I can send it to you. I can send a PDF. I'm happy to share it with you. Not a problem.
Okay.
I'll share a PDF copy with you. I have, you know, one of my scientific researches is in neural nets. I've looked a lot at it, and neuroscientists have not been able to find a single neural correlate of consciousness. There's no single neural correlate. So it's not consciousness, the conscious self does not reside in any specific location in the mind. 20 years ago, I wrote another book called The Gods Within. It's out of print, but I discovered it on the internet. It's somewhere there, and I'll be more than happy to share that with you as well, where I do bring in a lot of neuroscience as well. And in fact, there's some amazing stuff which happens in neuroscience. One is you can have alexia without agraphia. I don't know if you have heard of it. Alexia is where you have a brain injury, you know, there's an accident, brain injury, or a stroke. After that, a person gets into coma, and then finally they recover, and everything seems to be fine. But excepting for one thing, they cannot read. You show them letters A, B, C, D, etc., and they see it. Of course, A is like this, but once once you show them, if you show it to them later, they are not able to recognize that. So that's called alexia. They can't read, right? That's a deficit. But can you believe it that many of these people who are alexic due to brain injury can still write? So it's called alexia without agraphia. Isn't that amazing? Counterintuitive. So brain is this amazing structure, put together. And this is who the devatas are. The gods within are these various devatas which hold the inner sky up. This truly, everything comes together. We need to bring this knowledge to the world. And I'll be more than happy to, after this, I'll send you a PDF copy of The Gods Within as well. And you can share it freely with everybody. This is all, knowledge is to be shared with everybody.
Great. Thanks very much, sir.
Thank you, Ashish ji, and all of you. Really enjoyed being a part of your Yogastha conference.
I realized that we need to have more of your lectures, at least in IIT Bombay. You will surely inspire many minds to take ahead this cutting edge work. It's a very insightful work which is really innovative in nature, which is not just incremental in nature, but really take us to the new paradigm or the new perspective of the science. Thanks very much. I'll invite Anish Deshpande, who is another core member of the Yogastha team, to propose the vote of thanks.
Okay, sorry, I was unable to unmute myself. Thank you.
No problem, Anish.
Right. So, thank you, sir. Well, it's been a great 3 days, and it's culminated in this wonderful exemplary valedictory session. So, thank you, Professor Kark. Thank you very much for that. And I hope that everyone here has enjoyed the sessions and the talks. And I sincerely hope that we are all able to take something home, and we can all learn a bit from this experience and leave this conference a little more knowledgeable and a little wiser. So now I'll take this opportunity and extend a small vote of thanks. So first of all, I would like to thank the Institute and Director, Professor Subhashish Choudhury, for his continued support in all our endeavors. I would like to thank Professor Ashish Pandey and Dr. Sushma Khare for their immense efforts in coordinating this whole event, like talking with all the speakers, all this activity that's been going on. So huge thanks to all of you. I thank everybody who has come here, shared their views, presented their wonderful ideas and research on these topics. And I thank the Yogastha team and our faculty mentor, Professor Neeraj Kumbhakarna, for his continued guidance. And finally, and most importantly, I believe, I thank each and every one of the participants here today and over here with us for the past 3 days for participating. It wouldn't have been this success if it weren't for you. So if it weren't for you, if it weren't for your participation and your enthusiasm in genuinely learning about all these wonderful topics. So I'll keep this short, and I will wish you all the best of health, the best of well-being, the best of knowledge, everything. So stay safe, and thank you very much for joining us. Good evening. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. And I will send the stuff to you.
We'll wait for that.